Tom Kozlik from Hilltop Securities again with an economic and municipal market update. There has been some economic data that has come in better than expected, but COVID-19 remains a significant hurdle, and overall economic activity and mobility is still well below March 2020 levels. The labor market remains weak. Even though initial jobless claims for the week of January 16th came in slightly better than expected at 900,000, this is still a staggeringly high number, despite the quote-unquote better than expected result. For the 6 months prior to COVID-19, initial jobless claims ranged from a low of 204,000 to a high of 235,000. 900,000 is still only the second highest number we have seen going back to August 2020. The most recent result tells us the labor market remains weak and is still teetering. The January 20th inauguration of Joe Biden occurred without a hitch this week, and soon thereafter, the president began outlining steps his administration is going to take to get COVID-19 under control. Attention to COVID remains a priority because this virus is still spreading at a high rate, and the U.S. surpassed an unfortunate milestone this week. We have now seen over 400,000 deaths from COVID-19 in the U.S. since the beginning of 2020. The highest number of total deaths by state have been in New York, California, Texas, and Florida. President Biden announced the U.S. COVID-19 death toll will likely top 500,000 next month. And he said things are going to continue to get worse before they get better. The number of new COVID-19 cases and the number of deaths appears to be plateauing, but the numbers remain close to the highest we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic. The 7-day average of new cases has fallen to 201,000 from the high of 300,000 we saw in the beginning of January. This number remains significantly higher than the 7-day average of about 35,000 we saw in September of 2020. The 7-day average of new deaths also remains high at about 3,000 per day. Wednesday alone, we saw a little over 4,300 new deaths from COVID-19 in the United States. The COVID-19 situation is continuing to negatively impact mobility data. The longer, we are likely to see a negative overall impact on economic activity. We track the Dallas Fed's mobility data very closely, as many of you know. It has worsened since November, and it remains close to the levels that we haven't seen going back to May of 2020. This is not a constructive indicator for near-term economic releases. Because COVID-19 still remains the number one factor restricting activity, President Biden took several anti-COVID related actions, and Thursday announced his National Action Plan. Also, to help stem the tide of COVID-19, President Biden announced last week a first stage COVID-19 response package amounting to about $1.9 trillion. The proposal includes $350 billion of direct, unencumbered aid for state and local governments. It's important to note that that's a line item that has been facing intense political scrutiny going back to the first half of 2020. The first stage proposal also included $170 billion of aid for schools and higher education institutions. Overall, the package presented was criticized by some as being too much and coming too early after the fifth phase that it was approved by Congress at the end of December. Democrats, however, would like to move quickly on it. How long it takes to get a sixth phase approved and what it finally looks like is uncertain at this time. There are still a lot of questions that need to be answered and a lot of compromise that needs to be made. It is best to be mindful that this may take some time. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week. This has been Tom Kozlik from Hilltop Securities.